The facts are very clear. On the night of the 1st to the 2nd of October, Israeli forces intercepted roughly 40 plus civilian boats of the global Sumud flotilla in international waters, detained more than 400 participants. By Saturday, the 4th of October, yesterday, 137 deportees from 13 countries had landed in Istanbul on a special Turkish Airlines flight, including 36 Turkish nationals. Many said they were zip-tied for hours, denied medicine and water, subjected to humiliation, awoken every 2 hours. Israel rejects these claims and says detainees were safe in good health with rights observed. Both statements cannot be true at once, and the burden of proof now sits squarely with the detaining power. Testimony matters. An Italian regional councillor described activists forced to their knees, hit when they moved, mocked and insulted, then bruised and bussed to prison. Others spoke of being kept in the sun, given uniforms, their clothes and personal belongings confiscated or lost, stolen, and their access to medication blocked. Lawyers at Adalah allege prolonged kneeling with hands zip-tied, denial of toilets and water, and obstacles to legal counsel. Israel answered that these are complete lies. The contrast is stark enough to require an independent record. But there's also a matter of conduct by a government minister, and Israel's national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, filmed himself confronting detainees and shouting, "You are terrorists." He filmed. Now, under international law, detainees shouldn't be filmed. This is not a stray remark in a corridor. It is a filmed moment of state power taunting civilians who are not on trial and not convicted of anything. It is hard to reconcile with minimum standards of dignity owed to detainees under international law, and it invites the very inference that Israel says is unfair, that mistreatment was systemic. Now, I'm speaking as somebody who has been involved in an issue of torture in the past. My partner and other individuals who had arrived in Greece in 2001 were tortured routinely and abused in the most vile, oppressive way. And so watching these scenes and listening to this witness testimony is very much a matter of going back to those days over 20 years ago and hearing of the same sort of mistreatment. This is a loss of agency. This is a removal of agency. And that is part of torture. That is the process by which torture is ramped up. Greta Thunberg's presence is incidental to law but relevant to optics. Multiple witnesses alleged she was shoved, paraded and wrapped in an Israeli flag for propaganda value. Israel denies abuse. Either way, the symbolism is clumsy. The state makes a global figure the visual centerpiece of its triumph, then insists everything was routine. If routine includes public shaming and the theatrics by a cabinet minister, routine needs review. The problem is that when a government or a nation slips into bad behavior, it's corrosive, and people may not even realize how badly they are behaving. But the law is very clear. Two core instruments bite here. First, the UN Convention Against Torture, which both Israel and Greece have ratified. It prohibits torture and also cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. The line is not crossed only by beatings. It is crossed by deliberate humiliation, denial of essential medication, prolonged stress positions, or punitive deprivation of water. Second, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights bars degrading treatment and protects due process and access to a counsel, to law. Confiscation or loss of clothing, money and personal goods without prompt return or documentation raises separate issues of property interference and arbitrary treatment. None of this requires a courtroom flourish, only a paper trail. If the paper trail is missing or contradictory, the presumption must be investigated, not waved away. The fact that Turkey felt obliged to provide clothing on the plane for the activists to change into while they were journeying from Israel to Turkey demonstrates that the stories they are telling are true. There's also the maritime frame. Organisers say interception occurred about 55 to 88 kilometres from Gaza in international waters. Israel says the naval blockade is lawful and that it enforces it beyond territorial waters under the San Remo manual framework. Even if one grants the legality of the interception, nothing in blockade law suspends the absolute ban on torture or degrading treatment. Enforcement can be strict, but it cannot be cruel. And again, I keep coming back to the experience of my partner in Greece in 2001. It taught me something simple and brutal. That states that sign fine conventions sometimes treat them as a spotlight to stand under, not a rule to obey. Greece and Israel both carry treaty obligations that do not evaporate when a detainee holds a placard. If anything, high-tension cases demand higher care. The point is not to collapse distinct countries into one accusation, but to state a shared duty. If you detain, you document. If you restrain, you monitor. If you confiscate, you receipt and return. If you deny medication, you justify it medically and promptly review. Anything less is not order, it is caprice dressed as procedure. What happens next matters for evidence. Turkey received the deportees, routed them to forensic medical examinations and opened an inquiry. That is good practice. It preserves timelines, injuries, psychological impact and chain of custody details for belongings. If Israel is correct that claims are false, medical findings will show it. If the activists are correct, the record will stand without slogans. The communications war has already started. Israel's foreign ministry labelled the deportees provocateurs, while activists say they were kidnapped in international waters. Italy's foreign minister pressed for humane treatment. Italian lawmakers described being brutally stopped. Sweden raised concerns around Thunberg. Meanwhile, Israel insists all rights were respected. Syria's democracies should welcome independent verification. So should serious movements. That begins with unedited custody video, visitor logs, medical logs, confiscation inventories, and access to council records. And then there is the moral point people keep trying to mangle. Support for starving civilians and opposition to the blockade does not equal support for Hamas. Criticism of Mr. Netanyahu is not a statement of anti-Semitism. These false equivalences are corrosive shortcuts that let everyone avoid the hard work of standards. If a state treats unarmed detainees with contempt, it should be held to account. If an activist group crosses into provocation or incitement, it should be held to account. The metric is conduct, not tribe. So where does this leave us today? With 4 sober asks. 1. Immediate publication of detention protocols applied to flotilla detainees, with time-stamped logs of water, food, medical access, prayer access and movement between cells. If those logs are complete, they will help Israel. If they are not, that in itself is a finding. 2. Independent review, ideally ICRC plus a small panel of neutral jurists, of video recorded at the port, on buses and inside holding areas and prisons that night and the following days. Redact faces if needed, but show the chain of treatment. 3. A joint Israeli-Turkish liaison on property and medication return with a 30-day deadline and a published tally of items restored, items missing and compensation paid. The confiscation of clothes, cash, phones without proper return is not a footnote. It is the everyday face of abuse. 4. Prosecutional triage. If individual officers or commanders used unlawful force or humiliation, Israel should say so and act. If specific detainees assaulted personnel or destroyed property, charge them with evidence. Precision is the adult way through. The activists say their aim was to carry aid and to shame a blockade they view as collective punishment. Israel says the blockade is lawful and the flotilla was a stunt. Both can be stated without hating each other's people. What cannot be squared with each other's dignity is a minister gloating into a phone or a detainee forced to drink from a toilet while their inhaler sits in a bag half a corridor away. If that happened, It is an offence against law and against the basic decency a democracy owes even its critics. If it did not, then open the records and end the dispute with evidence, not edits. In Istanbul yesterday and today, there were reunions, forensic checks and interviews. There was pain and pride. There was also a quiet truth the testimonies share. If this is how foreigners are treated under the cameras, imagine the unseen rooms for Palestinians with no embassy and no audience. The activists have talked about names and messages scrawled in blood on the walls by previous Palestinian occupants. The comparison does not excuse violence at any point. It simply reminds us why the ban on degrading treatment is absolute. It is the floor under everyone, not a ceiling for the fortunate. This story proceeds, I think, even now. There's going to be a massive demonstration in Istanbul in favour of the activists and against the Israeli government and the siege of Gaza, and that is entirely fitting and entirely right. But the Israeli government, and particularly the participation and the gloating of Gvir, suggests there are questions that need urgent answering, and this comes, I think, now because of Gvir's visible participation. This becomes a major diplomatic incident, and I've said in the past that I think Greta Thunberg and the flotilla should have accepted the offer of the Pope and the offer of Italy and Greece and Cyprus to take the aid to Israel. That aid has not got through, of course. That is one thing. So if the flotilla was intent on delivering aid, it has failed to do so. If the flotilla was intent on causing a problem, it has certainly done that. I remain sceptical about the participation of Greta Thunberg and her intentions, but all my reservations are eclipsed by the stories of torture, alleged torture. Actually, no, the stories of torture are clear. That's not alleged. That is fact. Whether the torture took place or not, that is alleged. But the stories are not alleged. My attitude to the flotilla and to the situation has changed significantly because of those stories of torture, and I am horrified, and I'm disturbed that a state like Israel can participate in this. I'm not surprised when humanity has been debased so much. Soldiers and authority figures act with apparent impunity. I've seen that happen in Greece. I know it happens, but it doesn't make it any better. In the Greek instance, the case went to the European Court of Human Rights, and it took 11 years, but we won. We won. Greece was ordered to change some of its laws. Sadly, that hasn't happened. And for that reason, sadly, I think I probably will not return to Greece, a country I love very much, and a country with a language I speak comfortably. But, you know, events must be recognised and standards must be upheld. And we may all have opinions about the Israeli siege of Gaza. I think it's wrong. I think self-defense is perfectly reasonable, but I think the self-defense has slipped into revenge. What I didn't know, and what wasn't proven until now, is that the Israeli authorities have fallen beneath contempt and are clearly involved in degrading, inhuman treatment, if not terrorism, if not torture. And that is something that must be opposed. It must be proven. But the video evidence of Ben Gvir should have never have been allowed anywhere near those activists. That seems to me to be very close to proof. And I say that with great sadness.